There was a time in my life when I thought loving someone deeply was enough to make them stay. I believed if you care honestly, sacrifice quietly, and stay loyal through every mood and every silence, the other person will eventually understand your value. But real life does not always work that way. Sometimes the more you chase someone with pure intentions, the more invisible you become in their eyes. I remember waking up every morning waiting for her message, like it was the only thing that could make my day feel complete. My mood depended on her replies. If she talked with love, I felt alive. If she became cold for even a few hours, my heart started creating fears that never even existed. I kept telling myself this is what love feels like. I thought attachment meant loyalty. I thought giving someone constant attention was proof of how serious I was about them. But slowly, without realizing it, I stopped living for myself. I started ignoring my own peace just to keep her happy. I anged my routine, my priorities, even my personality. If she needed me, I was there immediately. If she ignored me, I still waited patiently. I made excuses for every hurtful thing because I was scared of losing her. And that is the dangerous thing about emotional attachment. It makes you believe losing someone else is worse than losing yourself. One night I remember staring at my phone for hours after she saw my message and never replied. It sounds small when you say it out loud, but people who truly loved someone know how painful silence can become. Your mind keeps asking questions your heart cannot answer. Did I do something wrong? Am I not enough anymore? Why am I so easy to ignore? That silence slowly destroys your confidence more than any argument ever could. And the worst part was that she knew I would stay no matter what. Some people don't realize your value when you are always available. Your constant presence becomes normal to them. Your efforts become expected instantly. Appreciated. They stop seeing the heart behind your actions because they think you will never leave anyway. I learned this lesson in the hardest way possible. I kept trying harder. I thought maybe if I loved more, understood more, tolerated more, things would change. But the truth is, you cannot force someone to recognize your worth by sacrificing your own. Love should not feel like begging for attention from the person you would give the world to. One day, I looked at myself and barely recognized who I had become. I was emotionally exhausted. I smiled less. I overthought everything. I felt anxious even during peaceful moments, because my happiness was completely connected to one person's behavior. That was the moment I realized this was no longer healthy love. This was emotional dependence. So for the first time, I became silent too. Not to play games, not to make her jealous, but because I was tired. Tired of proving my worth to someone who only noticed my absence more than my presence. I slowly stopped chasing conversations. I stopped checking my phone every few minutes. I stopped explaining my value to someone determined not to see it. And honestly, healing was not beautiful in the beginning. There were nights I missed her voice so much that it physically hurt. There were moments I almost texted her just to feel connected again. But every time I wanted to go back, I remembered how much of myself I had already lost trying to keep someone who never fought for me the same way. Little by little, I started rebuilding my life. I spent time with people who genuinely cared about me. I focused on my goals again. I started enjoying my own company. I realized peace feels very different when it does not depend on someone else's mood. The emptiness inside me slowly became strength. The pain that once broke me started teaching me. And something strange happens when you finally stop chasing people. They begin to notice your absence. The same person who ignored your love starts wondering why you became distant. The attention they once took for granted suddenly becomes valuable because it is no longer freely available. But by then, something inside you has already changed. You no longer want to beg for love. You no longer want to convince someone to see your worth. Because real self-growth begins the moment you understand this powerful truth. The right person will never make you feel unwanted for loving them sincerely. I am not saying love is wrong. Loving deeply is beautiful. Caring genuinely is rare, but never love someone so much that you abandon yourself in the process. Never become so emotionally attached that your identity disappears inside another person's approval. People can ignore your messages, your efforts, even your loyalty, but the one thing you should never allow anyone to ignore is your self-respect. And sometimes the most painful heartbreak becomes the exact reason you finally discover your true value. The day I stopped caring for chasing her was the day I finally found myself again. I used to think love meant giving someone complete access to your heart without limits. I thought if you truly loved someone, you should let them become your whole world. Their happiness becomes your happiness, their pain becomes your pain, and their presence becomes the reason your life feels complete. At first, it feels beautiful. You feel connected to someone in a way that makes everything else seem unimportant. But nobody tells you how dangerous emotional attachment can become when your peace starts depending entirely on another person. I remember how everything in my day slowly began revolving around her. The first thing I checked in the morning was my phone. The last thing I looked at before sleeping was our chat. Her mood controlled my emotions more than I realized. If she sounded happy, I felt calm. If she became distant, my mind turned into a battlefield full of fear and overthinking. And the scary part is that emotional attachment does not happen suddenly. It grows quietly. One conversation becomes a habit. One habit becomes emotional dependence. Before you know it, you stop living your own life, because your heart is constantly waiting for someone else to make you feel okay. At first, I ignored the signs because I called it love. I remember canceling plans just to stay available for her calls. I ignored my own stress because her problems mattered more to me. Even when I was mentally exhausted, I still showed up for her with patience and understanding. I thought this sacrifice proved my loyalty. But slowly, I started losing the version of myself that once felt confident and emotionally stable. The hardest part about emotional attachment is that you begin to fear losing the person more than losing yourself. Every small change in her behavior affected me deeply. If she replied late, I overthought for hours. If she sounded cold, my chest felt heavy the entire day. I kept searching for reassurance in anything's her tone, her attention, her effort. My heart became dependent on moments that should never have controlled my emotional state so much. One night, I remember sitting alone staring at our old messages because she had become distant again. I kept reading conversations from happier days, trying to understand what changed. That is what heartbreak does. When attachment becomes unhealthy, you stop accepting reality and start surviving inside memories. I blamed myself for everything. Maybe I was not enough. Maybe I loved too much. Maybe I cared in ways she never needed. Those thoughts slowly destroy a person from the inside because emotional attachment creates a dangerous illusion. You believe your worth depends on how someone treats you, and once you start believing that, every act of rejection feels personal. I stopped feeling confident in myself. I became emotionally weak without even noticing. The person who once had dreams, goals, and peace of mind slowly became someone waiting for one message to feel happy again. It is painful to admit, but there were days when her attention felt more important than my own mental health. That is not love. That is emotional dependence disguised as love. The breaking point came during a simple moment. She ignored me for days, after a small argument, while I stayed restless, unable to sleep properly. I kept checking my phone every few minutes like my life was paused, until she came back. Then suddenly, in the middle of that silence, I asked myself something that changed me forever. Why am I abandoning myself just to hold on to someone who can walk away so easily? That question hurt, because deep down, I already knew the answer. I had built my emotional world around one person. I gave her so much power over my happiness, that when she pulled away, my entire identity started collapsing. And that realization was terrifying. Healing from emotional attachment is not quick. People think moving on means forgetting someone. Real healing means learning how to feel complete without needing constant validation from another person. That was the hardest lesson of my life. I started spending time alone without distractions. At first, silence felt painful because I was no longer escaping my emotions through conversations with her. I had to face the emptiness I ignored for so long, but slowly, I began reconnecting with myself again. I started doing things I once loved before emotional attachment consumed me. I focused on my goals, my health, and my peace. I learned how to enjoy moments without needing someone else's approval to feel worthy, and little by little, the pain became lighter. I still missed her sometimes. Healing does not erase memories overnight, but the difference was that I no longer needed her attention to survive emotionally. My happiness stopped depending on whether someone chose me or ignored me. That changed everything. I realized real love should add peace to your life, not constant anxiety. The right relationship should make you feel emotionally safe, not emotionally addicted. When someone truly values you, you will not spend nights questioning your worth because of their silence. Looking back now, I understand something most people learn too late. Emotional attachment can make you confuse obsession with love, dependence with loyalty, and suffering with commitment. But real love never asks you to lose yourself in order to keep someone else. The moment you stop depending on another person to feel complete, is the moment your healing truly begins. Because no matter how deeply you love someone, you should never hand them the power to decide your value. And the strongest version of you is born the day your heart finally learns how to stand on its own. Heartbreak does not destroy you all at once. It happens slowly, in quiet moments nobody else sees. It happens when you wake up and remember the person you loved is no longer there the same way. It happens when you open in your phone hoping for a message that never comes. It happens when you pretend to smile around people while something inside you feels completely empty. I remember the exact phase in my life when everything started falling apart emotionally. From the outside, I looked normal. I still talked to people, still laughed sometimes, still showed up where I needed to be. But internally, I was carrying a pain I did not know how to explain. The person I once trusted with my heart slowly became distant, cold, and emotionally unavailable. And no matter how much I tried to fix things, it felt like I was fighting alone. The hardest part about heartbreak is not just losing someone. It is losing the version of yourself that existed when they loved you back. I started questioning everything about myself. I wondered if I was too emotional, too caring, too available. Every memory became painful because I kept comparing the past to the present. I would sit alone replaying old conversations in my head, trying to find the exact moment things changed between us. But sometimes, there is no dramatic ending. Sometimes love simply fades on one side, while the other person keeps holding on, and that one-sided pain can destroy your confidence in ways people do not understand. There were nights when I could not sleep properly because my mind was full of unanswered questions. I kept checking her social media even though it only hurt me more. I kept hoping she would suddenly realize my value and come back the way she used to be. But heartbreak teaches you something painful. Sometimes the closure you are waiting for never comes. At first, I handled the pain in the worst possible way. I isolated myself emotionally. I stopped focusing on my goals. I lost motivation for things that once mattered to me. It felt like my life had paused while the world around me kept moving forward. I hated how weak I had become because of one person's absence. But heartbreak has a strange way of forcing growth on to people who never wanted to change. One day, after weeks of emotional exhaustion, I looked at myself honestly for the first time. I realized I had spent so much energy trying to save a relationship that I completely abandoned my own emotional health. I kept chasing someone who was already emotionally gone, while ignoring the damage happening inside me. That realization hurt deeply because I finally understood something important. Heartbreak was not just breaking my heart, it was revealing parts of me that needed healing long before this relationship ended. I started asking myself difficult questions. Why did I depend so heavily on someone else's attention to feel worthy? Why did losing one person make me forget my own value completely? Why was I giving so much love to others while neglecting myself? Those questions changed the direction of my healing. Instead of trying to get her back, I slowly started trying to rebuild myself. And honestly, the beginning of self-growth feels low. Nelly. People talk about healing like it is peaceful and inspiring, but most of the time it feels uncomfortable. You have to sit alone with your thoughts. You have to accept painful truths. You have to stop romanticizing people who hurt you emotionally. Most importantly, you have to learn how to survive without the emotional dependency you once relied on. I started creating small routines for myself again. I focused on my work, my goals, my health. I spent less time stalking old memories and more time understanding my own emotions. Slowly, I became stronger in ways nobody could see immediately. The pain did not disappear overnight, but it started changing me. I noticed I was becoming calmer, more emotionally aware, less desperate for validation. I stopped begging people to stay in my life. I stopped over-explaining my worth to those who could not appreciate it. The same heartbreak that once made me feel worthless slowly started teaching me self-respect. And then something unexpected happened. The person who once ignored my love began noticing my absence, not because I became cold or arrogant, but because I stopped chasing. I stopped making someone the center of my universe while forgetting myself. When people see you healing, growing, and finding peace without them, it affects them differently. Sometimes your silence speaks louder than all the love you once gave loudly. But by then, something inside me had already changed. I no longer wanted revenge. I no longer wanted to prove anything. I simply wanted peace. That is when I realized true self-growth is not about becoming emotionally hard after heartbreak. It is about becoming emotionally stronger without losing your ability to love sincerely. Heartbreak taught me lessons comfort never could. It taught me that attachment without self-respect becomes suffering. It taught me that love should never require you to destroy your mental peace to keep someone close. It taught me that people can leave your life, disappoint you, ignore your value, and still accidentally become the reason you transform into a stronger person. Looking back now, I no longer see heartbreak as the end of my story. It was the moment life forced me to stop seeking my worth inside someone else's attention, because sometimes the pain that almost destroys you becomes the exact reason you finally discover who you are meant to become. And the person who once cried over being abandoned eventually becomes someone powerful enough to never abandon themselves again. There is a strange kind of pain that comes from watching someone slowly lose interest in you while you are still loving them with your whole heart. It is confusing because nothing ends suddenly. The conversations become shorter, the effort becomes weaker, the attention disappears little by little, until one day you realize you are the only one still trying to hold everything together. I remember how hard I fought to keep that relationship alive. Even when I felt in a different way. I stayed patient. Even when her energy changed, I kept convincing myself that things would go back to normal. I thought loyalty meant staying no matter how much it hurt. I believed if I loved her enough, eventually she would see my value again. But love does not survive on effort from one side alone. There were nights I stayed awake overthinking simple things. Why was she replying differently now? Why did she sound happier with everyone else? Why did I suddenly feel like a burden to someone who once made me feel special? Those questions slowly destroyed my peace, because emotional attachment makes rejection feel deeply personal. I started losing confidence in myself without realizing it. I became emotionally dependent on her attention. One good conversation could make my whole day feel beautiful, and one cold response could ruin my entire mood. That is the dangerous part about attachment. You slowly hand someone else control over your emotional state. And the more I chased him, emotionally, the further she seemed to drift away. At first, I blamed myself for everything. I thought maybe I was not successful enough, attractive enough, interesting enough. I kept trying to improve things between us while completely ignoring the damage happening inside me. The relationship became less about love, and more about fear of losing her, fear of being forgotten, fear of accepting that someone I cared about deeply no longer valued me the same way. Then one day, after another painful argument followed by silence, something inside me became tired, not angry, not bitter, just emotionally exhausted. I realized I had spent so much time trying to make someone appreciate me that I forgot how to appreciate myself. I was waiting for love from someone else, while neglecting my own healing completely. That moment changed me because for the first time, I stopped asking, how do I make her stay? And started asking, why am I destroying myself trying to keep someone who is emotionally leaving? That question became the beginning of my transformation. I slowly stopped chasing conversations that felt forced. I stopped begging for attention indirectly through over-explaining my feelings. I stopped making someone the center of my emotional world. Instead, I focused on rebuilding the parts of myself I ignored for so long. And honestly, growth after heartbreak feels very lonely in the beginning. People think healing looks motivational and strong, but most of the time it feels quiet and painful. You sit alone with memories that still hurt. You fight the urge to text someone you miss deeply. You learn how to survive days where your heart still wants the person your mind knows you need distance from. But little by little, life starts changing. I began focusing on my goals again. I became more disciplined with my time. I spent less energy proving my worth to others and more energy creating a better version of myself. I started protecting my peace instead of sacrificing it for temporary emotional comfort. And slowly, I became someone different. Not colder, just stronger. The sadness that once controlled me started turning into self-respect. The loneliness became self-awareness. The heartbreak that once broke my confidence slowly started building my character. I no longer needed constant reassurance to feel valuable because I finally understood something important: your worth does not decrease just because someone failed to recognize it. Then something unexpected happened. The same person who once ignored my love slowly started noticing my absence. Sometimes people only realize your importance after they no longer have easy access to your energy, your loyalty, your care. When you stop chasing, stop begging, stop overextending yourself emotionally, people suddenly feel the emptiness of what they took for granted. I remember when she started reaching out again differently. Her tone changed, her attention returned in small ways. It was almost like she finally saw the version of me I was trying so hard to show her before. But by then, my heart was no longer standing in the same place. Because healing changes you. The version of me that once begged silently for her attention no longer existed. I had spent too many nights rebuilding myself from emotional exhaustion. I had worked too hard to find peace within myself again. And for the first time, I understood that growth is not about making someone regret losing you. It is about becoming someone who no longer abandons themselves for love. That realization gave me peace. I no longer wanted validation from the people who ignored my value during my weakest moments. I no longer needed revenge or emotional closure. I simply became grateful for the pain, because it forced me to grow in ways comfort never could. Sometimes people come back when they see your growth, your peace, your confidence, and your emotional strength, but what they do not understand is that the pain I caused already transformed you into someone different. The person who once cried for their attention becomes the person who finally understands their own worth. And that is the irony of heartbreak. Sometimes losing the person you wanted forever becomes the exact reason you finally find yourself. One of the most painful things a person can experience in love is reaching a point where they start begging silently just to feel valued. Not always through words, but through effort, patience, overthinking, and emotional sacrifice. You keep giving more of yourself hoping the other person will finally realize how deeply you care, but sometimes the harder you try to keep someone, the more you lose yourself in the process. I remember a phase in my life when I confused loyalty with emotional suffering. I thought real love meant tolerating distance, inconsistency, and emotional neglect without complaining. If she ignored me, I waited. If she became cold, I stayed understanding. If she hurt me unintentionally, I made excuses for her behavior because I loved her deeply and did not want to lose the connection we once had. At first, I convinced myself this was maturity. I believed patience was proof of true love, but over time, I realized there is a huge difference between loving someone sincerely and abandoning your self-respect to keep them close. The relationship slowly became emotionally one-sided. I was the one checking in first. I was the one trying to fix every misunderstanding. I was the one carrying conversations when silence grew between us. And the worst feeling in the world is knowing you are giving your whole heart to someone who only gives you temporary attention whenever it feels convenient for them. Still, I stayed, not because I was weak, but because emotional attachment can make people tolerate pain they normally never would. When your heart becomes deeply connected to someone, you start fearing their absence more than your own emotional exhaustion. You tell yourself things will improve, you wait for old memories to return, you keep hoping the person you fell in love with will suddenly come back, emotionally. But sometimes people change, while you are still holding on to who they used to be. I remember one night very clearly. I had spent hours overthinking after another cold conversation with her. I kept replaying her words in my head, trying to understand why I suddenly felt so unwanted by someone I cared about so much. Then I looked at myself honestly for the first time in months. I was mentally drained. I was emotionally anxious all the time. My happiness depended completely on her mood. I had stopped focusing on my own life because I was too busy trying to save a relationship that only survived through my effort. And deep down, I knew something painful. I was begging for love in ways I never deserved to. Not through desperate words, but through constant emotional chasing. That realization broke something inside me. I started asking myself difficult questions. Why was I trying so hard to convince someone to value me? Why was I accepting the bare minimum from someone I would have given everything to? Why did I believe losing this relationship would make me less worthy as a person? The truth hurt because I finally understood that my self-worth had become attached to someone else's attention. And that is one of the most dangerous emotional traps in relationships. When your confidence depends on how someone treats you, every small rejection feels like proof that you are not enough. You stop seeing your own value clearly because you are constantly waiting for another person to confirm it for you. That is not love. That is emotional dependence disguised as devotion. For the first time, I stopped focusing on whether she would stay and started focusing on why I no longer felt emotionally safe inside the relationship. I realized that real love should never make you feel like you are competing for basic attention, and care. The right person does not make you beg silently for reassurance. The right person does not leave you constantly questioning your value. The right person sees your loyalty as something precious, not something guaranteed. That realization changed the way I viewed relationships forever. Healing was not easy. There were days I missed her deeply. There were moments I almost reached out again, because loneliness can make familiar pain feel comforting. But every time I wanted to go back, I remembered how emotionally small I had become, while trying to hold on to someone who no longer held on to me the same way. So I started rebuilding myself slowly. I spent time alone understanding who I was outside that relationship. I focused on my goals again. I started protecting my emotional peace instead of sacrificing it for temporary affection. Most importantly, I stopped chasing validation from people who could not appreciate my heart properly. And little by little, I changed. I became calmer emotionally, stronger mentally. I stopped feeling desperate for love because I finally understood that being alone is far less painful than staying in a relationship where you constantly feel unwanted. That was the moment my self-worth returned. I realized something powerful. Love should feel safe, mutual, and genuine. You should never have to shrink yourself emotionally just to make someone stay. The right relationship will not require endless chasing, begging, or proving your value repeatedly, because people who truly care about you do not make you feel difficult to love. Looking back now, I no longer hate the heartbreak I went through. It taught me lessons I probably would never have learned otherwise. It taught me that attachment without self-respect leads to suffering. It taught me that emotional peace is more valuable than temporary attention. Most importantly, it taught me that the strongest thing a person can do is walk away from places where their love is no longer valued. Sometimes losing someone is painful, but losing yourself trying to keep someone is far more dangerous. And the moment you finally choose your self-respect over your fear of being alone is the moment your real healing begins.